In this chapter, we're going to make a start on building the go-kart project, which is something which will feature in all of the DVDs in this series to one extent or another. In this DVD, we're going to kick off by building some of the elements in the go-kart out of primitives. Now, I've actually gone ahead and built some of these elements already to give myself a guide, which I can use to demonstrate some things with you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace some of those elements, and I'm also going to guide you through how I built some of them and some of the best practices that I used when I did so. What you can see here is basically a bunch of primitives, in this case cubes, that I've put together to actually make a guide for the frame of the go-kart. In the second DVD in this series, we'll be using cubes and some mesh modeling techniques to actually build the frame itself. But in this DVD, we're not actually going to be building the frame. We're going to be building some of the linkages and axles and the hubs of some of the wheels in the go-kart. We're only going to build one side of the go-kart because it's symmetrical, so the other side is basically a mirror image of what we build on the side we're going to build today. So let me just hide this guide frame that you can see here. I'm going to use the layers system here. So you can see I've got the frame here, and I'm just going to hide the guide, and I'm going to show you the frame. So this is the frame that we're going to look at in the second DVD in the series, and you can see it's just one piece, just one mesh. And I've created that using mesh editing, which is, as I said, the subject of the next DVD in the series. And then if I show you the elements that we're going to be looking at today, you can see it's these things here in purple. Now I've actually frozen the frame, so I can't select this guide frame. It's just here to give us an idea of what part of the go-kart we're working on. But you can see we've got the front steering linkages here. And you can see we've got the steering column here. And then also we've got the back axle over here. Now this would actually extend all the way through this tube here, but in this case I've just made it stop here. So what I'm going to do next is, as I said, I'm going to show you how I created some of these primitives, and I'm also going to actually replace some of these primitives with new primitives which do a better job of what they're actually doing. Um, and I'm also going to modify some of these primitives using some modifiers, which will show you how you can use modifiers to implement simple modifications, which you can then work on later with mesh editing. And I'm also going to show you a tool which we didn't hit on earlier on in this DVD. And the reason for that is that it's used so heavily in this chapter that I thought it was actually better to introduce it here. And that's the snap tool that you can see up here. It's called Align. And there's a new version of it here called, I believe it's called, we have to actually have something selected, Quick Align. And that actually cuts to the chase, whereas this particular version of it actually requires some user input. So let's very quickly look at some of these elements, and you can see I've actually built them up, and you can see that they're very simple, and they can easily be improved upon. You can see this here is a tube, and we've used a cylinder to go through the center of that tube. This tube actually gets welded onto the cart frame here, and so it holds the steering column in place. Then we've got this bar at the end of it, which you can see at the moment is just a very simple cube. And then you've got these L-shaped pieces of metal, which we're going to replace later with. We're actually going to enhance this piece here using a bend modifier to actually create a one-piece piece of metal here. And then we've got these bolts that go through, and you can see that the bolt through the middle is a cylinder. And even though it may not look like it, but these are actually cylinders as well. They just have 6 sides to make up the ends of the bolts. As you can see here, we've got the bolt end and the nut here. And then we've got the same kind of thing going on here, very large end of the bolt there. We've got the bolt going through. Then we've got this tube, which allows this to actually rotate along here. This is a little lever here, which is moved by this rod here. When the user turns the steering wheel, when he turns it left to right, it pushes this rod back and forth. That makes this move this way, and obviously that makes then the wheel turn along this axis that you can see here. And then we've got the axle itself, and this is actually the hub of a wheel. And then we've got 2 washers here, washer 1 and washer 2, and then we've got a nut on the end of the axle to hold the wheel on. So the first thing I'm going to replace is this nut here, and what I'm going to replace it with is another primitive, and it's in the extended primitives menu, and it's called chamfer cylinder. And this is basically, it's got chamfering built in. So you can see at the moment this nut is very simple. It hasn't got any chamfering on the ends. We could actually add that chamfering by using mesh editing, but we're not going to look at that in this DVD. So we're going to stick purely to a primitive based method of modeling. So firstly, I'm just going to create a cylinder here. Just change. There we go. That's nice. And what we need to do now is we need to align this cylinder to the cylinder here. And we're going to use the quick align tool for that. So we'll just click on the tool and then we'll click on here. And you can see now you've got a number of options and these will all make sense if I just untick them. You've got the align position tool, which as you can imagine allows you to align the object's position to the other position. And if you think back to our discussion about pivot points earlier on in this DVD, all this is doing is taking the X value of this cylinder and it's making it equal the X value of this cylinder. And it does the same thing for the Y. So let's do that. You can see now the X values are now the same. Y, Z. So now you can see it's roughly in the right position. And then we've got orientation. And that's going to make the rotation values equal the same thing as the object that you're aligning to. So we'll align the X-axis, the Y-axis. Oh yeah, it's snapped into position. And the Z-axis. We don't really need to do all of them in this case, but generally it's just a good idea to do all three to make sure that it's a full alignment. We'll just say OK to that. And then I'll just undo that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this other tool here, the quick align. And if I click on here, you can see that the object has its position snapped to the object that we just clicked on. And that's all that's quick align does. It just snaps the position. So in this case, we don't actually need that. We need to snap the position and the rotation. So let's go back to normal align, click on here, and we've got it set up exactly as we want it. So we'll just say OK. And then I'm just going to go into wireframe view by pressing F3. And what I'm going to do now is resize this bolt until it fits the size of the original bolt. So let's just scale it down slightly. Let's change the radius. There we go. We'll change the height slightly until we're in the right position. Then we'll increase the fillet. So now we've got a nice bevel. And if we wanted to here, we could increase the fillet segments a few times if we wanted a rounded bolt, as you can see here. So now that we've got this, we can get rid of the original bolt. And you can see now we have the bolt here. Let me just change this color here. And it's actually gone grey because we've got primitive elements final, which is the default group at the moment for layers. We've got that on frozen, so we'll just untick that so it's unfrozen. And then the other thing is we'll turn off smoothing to get rid of the nasty looking smoothing there because it's trying to smooth over the edges. And in this case, I think that's actually probably a little bit too large and probably too many segments there. So we'll just put down the number of segments just to 3. And also we'll make the fillet a little bit tighter. So now we have this nut in place, we can replace the bolt that actually runs through the center here, this axle. So let's look what we've got here. We've actually got 2 objects, I think. So we're looking at wireframe, we've got 2 cylinders here. Well, let's just replace these 2. I think we can actually replace them both with 1, I think, by the looks of it. So let's go in here, and we've got chamfer cylinder. In fact, let's just use this cylinder here. We'll hold down Shift and drag it to the right. That copies it. We'll choose that to be a copy. And we already know it's aligned, so we just need to increase the number of segments in it. So let's just change the sides to something like 24. And we'll move it into position here. We'll change the radius to roughly the right kind of size. That's looking pretty cool. And then we'll just change the height. And there we are. So we've got a pretty good replacement now for the original. And I'm just going to right click on it here, choose free selection. So that's just frozen it for a second. Delete the original cylinder. Also delete this one here. And then we'll say unfreeze all. Yes, we'll say yes to that. Just freeze this layer again. So now we've replaced that cylinder and this nut here. We can do the same thing now with these washers, obviously. So we'll just drag this to the right, shift drag, okay for that. And before we copy it again, let's actually make it into the right kind of shape. So let's get it roughly in the right position. Change this fillet size so it's even tighter. We don't need that many segments in there, so we'll just reduce that slightly to save on polygons. And now we'll change the radius until it's the right kind of size. Just increase it up here. A little bit too large at the moment, isn't it? Reduce that slightly. Let's increase the number of size. Now, because it's a larger uh, circular object, we probably need more sides. So instead of going for 24, let's go for 32. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's looking okay, I think. And then obviously we need to change the height until it's the right kind of thickness. There we go. That's not bad. Let's just make the fillet just a little bit larger. And now let's just delete the original cylinder and this one here. Hold down Shift, drag it into position. And we've got a nice duplicate. Now in this case, if I want to make a change to both at the same time, it's better if they're instances. So I'll just say instance that. So now they're instances of each other, which means that obviously if I change the segmentation or any of the values, if I change this here, they both change because they're instances. So it's good to have that relationship in this case because we need to keep them the same. Let's have a look at that in shaded view. So there you can see we've got some quite nice things here. Now, for the nut, it made sense that we actually had smoothing turned off, but you can see that we're not getting any smoothing along the edges here. So let's just turn on smoothing in this case. And also here. Obviously that's an instance, so it turned on automatically. We'll just turn on this as well, so we've got some smoothing on there. And obviously now we can change the hub as well, so we'll just change these two very quickly. Let me just do that. So I'm going to use these as the basis. Let's move that into position. Actually, let's move it up here. And in this case, I'll go for a copy because it doesn't actually need to maintain a relationship with anything. So just put the base of the cylinder into the right spot. We'll just increase the radius here till it's roughly the right size. Then we'll just crank up the height till we've got it to be the right height. Turn around here until we can see it a bit more clearly. Just click on that spinner there. I'm going to increase the fillet size here. And for that to work, I need to increase the segments here. Just select the original cylinder, press delete. There we go, we've replaced the center hub. So you can see now, bit by bit, we're replacing these elements. And you can see that as I'm doing so, it's improving the quality of the geometry. And this will mean that at render time, you'll get some really nice shading across here. And that's a very important thing when you're modeling. You know, you're trying to produce something that reacts nicely to light. You're not just trying to produce a basic, simple model. You're also trying to produce something that looks beautiful when it's rendered. And adding these bevels to the edges here will really help it to react to the light nicely. And if we were to go in and do some Ashme editing, we could also bevel these edges here, which would actually make these a little bit more realistic. But for now, I think that's looking pretty good. So let's just carry on with these replacements. We're going to move this into position here. It's going to be a copy. Change the radius down. That's fine. Change the fillet. There we go. Let's get this, the original. We just click there a couple of times. Move this out. Oh, it's actually very high, very long. So let's just change the height until we get it to. So there we are. That's looking pretty cool now. And we'll just replace this nut here, which is how the actual axle is welded onto this pipe here. So let's just do that. Let's just get this nut. Hold on Shift. Copy it. Obviously, we don't want it to be exactly the same. We're going to change the radius. Let's move that into position. Roughly right. Let's change the height until it's the right height. There we go, almost there. And now we're going to change the radius. But before I do that, let's go into rotate mode, pressing E. I'm going to turn on angle snaps, which you can see is already active. And my angle snaps are set up to be 5 degrees, which, as I said earlier in the DVD, is pretty much my preference most of the time. Now you can see that at the moment this is actually not rotated in the same orientation as the original. So I need to rotate this through 30 degrees, I believe it is. There we are, 30 degrees, and now it's in the same orientation. And now we can change the radius until we get the radius to match. There we are, and I think I'm going to keep the size in that fillet. I quite like it. So I just need to select the original nut now, the simple one. Just delete that. So now we've improved that. Now, we don't have a primitive called chamfer tube, and you can see this is a tube here. So we'll actually leave that. And what we'll do is, in DVD 2 or DVD 3 in this series, we'll come along and we'll bevel this by hand. But for now, I think it's hunky-dory. So let's actually work on the bits that we can work on. So we can see we've got a nut here, we've got the top of the bolt here, also we've got the bolt itself. So let's just replace all those elements now. And what we need to do is we need to get this nut here, and we need to put in the same orientation as these. So obviously we're going to use the align tool. So I'm just going to click up here. Actually, first we need to create a copy of it. So hold on Shift, drag it up here. We've got a copy. Now, I'm not going to make two copies because I'm going to make this into this. And then because it's in the same alignment, it's very easy to then shift drag it down on the same axis. So we're using the natural world axes to make our modeling job a lot easier. So let's just use the align tool, click on here. It's already set up to do exactly what we want. Just say OK. Move it down into position. Let's see what happens when we click on the height. See, we've actually got the base in the wrong place. It might be better actually if it faces the opposite direction. So let's just rotate this. We've got angle snaps on, so that makes it easy. We know that we're going to end up with 90 degrees if we keep on rotating. Shift it upwards into the right kind of position here. Change the height. Just make it a little bit smaller until it matches there. Change the radius. Just holding down on the radius spinner just to make it a little bit finer in control. Select the original, delete. And now we'll just drag this down, shift drag into position. That's okay. Press Z, zoom in. And yeah, that's roughly right. Change the height. There we go. We've got quite a thin little bolt. Let's actually make it a little bit thicker. I think it looks nicer if it's maybe a little bit thicker. And then let's get the original here. Delete. Yeah, that's looking good. We're going to take this cylinder here, shift drag it, copy. Okay. Go up here, align. Click on here. There it is. It's aligned. Let's check where the base is. You can see it's actually at the bottom here. So again, we'll just rotate it 380 degrees. There we are. Not quite right, actually, I think. No, that is right. And then we'll move that up into position up here so it's inside the body here. Just modify the radius and you can tell it just about disappears. Let's zoom in a bit to be a little bit more accurate. I think that's actually fine. Pull this up here. And there we are. Select the original simple version and delete it. So there you go. We've replaced a number of objects here and we now have a much nicer looking little axle here. And as I said, this particular element here, we don't have a primitive that can improve on it. But as I said in DVD2 or DVD3, we can actually go in and edit the mesh of that and do it manually, which is actually very quick to do as well. And we can put bevels on that and improve that tube. But up until this area here, we've now produced quite a nice little finessing to the sort of geometry that you saw that I originally sketched out just using the basic cube and the basic cylinder elements. Okay, so that's it for this chapter. Let's move on now into the next chapter where we look at similar areas to what we've been dealing with here, but we're going to look a little bit more at using modifiers to make some slightly more advanced modifications to the geometry here.